A former high school bully returns to make amends, but her victim's unexpected response transforms both their lives in ways neither could imagine. The champagne glass trembled in my hand as I watched Sienna Matthews walk through the mahogany doors of the Riverside Country Club, her emerald gown flowing like liquid poison across the marble floor, and in that moment, I knew my carefully constructed world was about to shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. 20 years had passed since graduation, yet the sight of her still made my breath catch like a frightened child hiding in the girls' bathroom. The annual Millbrook High reunion buzzed around me, former classmates laughing, reminiscing, pretending we'd all been friends, but everything faded to white noise as Sienna's eyes found mine across the crowded ballroom. Time collapsed like a house of cards. I was Paige Thornton now, not the awkward, overweight girl who'd cowered in hallways while Sienna and her pack circled like vultures. My transformation had been complete. Personal trainer, wardrobe consultant, therapist, and eventually plastic surgery had carved away every trace of my former self. Yet seeing her again, I felt 16 and terrified, my carefully applied makeup suddenly feeling like war paint smeared by tears. Paige. The voice behind me belonged to Marcus Chen, my date for the evening and unwitting shield against the past. His hand touched my shoulder with concern. You look like you've seen a ghost. If only he knew how accurate that description was. Sienna had been the ghost haunting every achievement, every relationship, every moment of supposed triumph in my adult life. The successful law practice, the penthouse apartment, the designer clothes, all of it had been built on the foundation of proving her wrong, of becoming someone she could never touch again. But why was she walking directly toward me with that strange, almost vulnerable expression on her face? The Sienna I remembered wore cruelty, like designer perfume, never showing weakness or uncertainty. This woman approaching me seemed different. Older, obviously, but there was something else, a weight in her shoulders, shadows beneath expertly applied concealer that spoke of battles fought and perhaps lost. My heart hammered against my ribs as she stopped just 3 feet away, close enough that I could smell her signature gardenia perfume, the same scent that had haunted my nightmares for years. The ballroom continued its celebration around us, but we existed in a bubble of suspended time and unresolved history. Hello, Paige. Her voice was softer than I remembered, missing that sharp edge that used to slice through my confidence like a blade. You look incredible. Really incredible. The compliment should have felt like victory, but instead it left me more confused than ever. Where was the sneer? The subtle dig designed to find the tender spots she'd mapped so carefully in high school? This wasn't the script I'd rehearsed in my head for 2 decades. Sienna. I managed to keep my voice steady, though my grip on the champagne flute threatened to shatter the delicate crystal. I didn't expect to see you here. I almost didn't come. She glanced around the room, then back to me with an expression I couldn't read. Actually, that's not true. I came specifically to see you. The admission hit me like a physical blow. Marcus shifted beside me, sensing the undercurrents, but unable to interpret them. He had no idea that the elegant woman in emerald silk had once shoved me into a locker so hard that the metal door left bruises on my spine for weeks. He didn't know about the rumors she'd spread, the cruel nickname she'd coined, or the way she'd turned my senior year into a daily gauntlet of humiliation. Why? The word escaped before I could stop it, raw and vulnerable in a way that made me immediately angry at myself. 20 years of therapy, success, and rebuilding, and she could still reduce me to that broken girl with a single conversation. Sienna's eyes flickered with something that looked almost like pain. She took a half step closer, lowering her voice so Marcus couldn't hear. Because I owe you more than an apology, Paige. I owe you the truth. The truth? What truth could possibly matter after all these years? I had built my entire adult identity around moving beyond what she'd done to me, around proving that her cruelty hadn't defined me. What truth could she possibly possess that wouldn't destroy the careful equilibrium I'd spent decades creating? Before I could respond, she pressed something into my palm, a small piece of paper, warm from her hand. Meet me tomorrow. Please. There are things you need to know about why everything happened the way it did. Things that might change how you see everything. Then she was gone, melting back into the crowd as suddenly as she'd appeared, leaving me standing there with Marcus asking questions I couldn't answer and a piece of paper burning in my hand like a secret too dangerous to unfold. I excused myself to the ladies' room, my hands shaking as I finally looked at what she'd given me. An address I didn't recognize, written in the same careful script I remembered from high school notes passed between her inner circle, notes that had often been about me, planning fresh torments or analyzing my latest humiliation for their entertainment. But there was something else written below the address, something that made my blood run cold. I know about your father, Paige. I've always known. The paper fluttered to the marble floor as my legs gave out, forcing me to grip the edge of the ornate sink for support. My father? What could she possibly know about my father that I didn't? He'd been gone since I was 12, disappeared one night with nothing but a note saying he couldn't handle being a parent anymore. Mom had spent years drinking herself to sleep over it, and I'd spent even more years in therapy trying to process the abandonment. Unless she knew something else. Something that would explain why her torment had always felt so personal, so specifically crafted to hit exactly where it would hurt most. The way she'd known exactly which insecurities to exploit, which fears to magnify. Had it all been random cruelty, or had there been method to her madness? I retrieved the paper with trembling fingers, studying the address again. It was in Riverside Heights, the expensive district where she'd grown up, where her family's pharmaceutical fortune had bought them influence and immunity from consequences. The same district where my father had worked as a groundskeeper for various estates before his disappearance. The coincidences were piling up like storm clouds, and I found myself remembering details I'd buried years ago. The way Sienna's eyes had flashed with something more than casual cruelty when she'd called me Daddy's little disappointment. How she'd always seemed to know exactly when my mother was having her worst days, timing her attacks for maximum impact. The rumors she'd spread hadn't just been random, they'd been surgical strikes designed by someone who understood my vulnerabilities intimately. Marcus was waiting when I returned to the ballroom, concern etched across his features. Everything okay? You've been gone for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Had I really been in that bathroom for 20 minutes, staring at a piece of paper and unraveling 20 years of assumptions? The reunion continued around us, but I felt disconnected from it all, as if I were watching from behind glass. I need to go home, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I'm not feeling well. It wasn't exactly a lie. The revelation that Sienna might know something about my father had left me nauseated and dizzy, like the ground beneath my feet had shifted when I wasn't looking. Everything I thought I knew about my past, about her motivations, about my father's abandonment, about the random cruelty of high school hierarchies, suddenly felt as fragile as spun glass. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my penthouse bedroom, the city lights casting moving shadows that seemed to mock my restlessness. The address burned in my mind like a brand, and with it came a flood of questions I'd never thought to ask. Why had my father really left? The note he'd left behind had been brief, almost cruel in its dismissiveness. I can't do this anymore. Don't look for me. Mom had never wanted to talk about it, deflecting my questions with increasingly creative excuses until I'd finally stopped asking. But what if there had been more to the story? What if Sienna's family, with their money and influence, had been involved somehow? The Matthews owned half the businesses in town, including the landscaping company that had employed my father. It wouldn't have been difficult for them to make someone disappear, professionally, if not literally. The more I thought about it, the more pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Sienna's persecution of me hadn't started immediately when I transferred to Millbrook High. It had begun several months into my sophomore year, right around the time my father had vanished. Before that, I'd been invisible to her, just another unremarkable new student trying to find their place. But something had changed, and suddenly I'd become her favorite target. The timing couldn't be coincidental, could it? Morning came without sleep, and I found myself standing in my walk-in closet trying to decide what one wore to confront the demons of their past. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent so much energy transforming my exterior that I'd never fully dealt with the interior wounds. Now those wounds were threatening to tear open, and all my designer armor felt woefully inadequate. I chose simple jeans and a cashmere sweater, wanting to look successful, but not trying too hard. If Sienna was planning some elaborate form of extended cruelty, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me dressed like I was preparing for battle. The drive to Riverside Heights felt like traveling backwards through time. Nothing had changed much in the exclusive neighborhood. The same massive houses hidden behind manicured hedges, the same sense of old money and older secrets. I'd avoided this area for years, taking elaborate detours to avoid even driving through it. The address led me to a small coffee shop tucked between a boutique and an art gallery, the kind of place where a cup of coffee cost more than some people made in an hour. It was exactly the sort of venue where Sienna would feel comfortable, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and privilege that had always been her birthright. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her back to the wall, a position that would let her see anyone coming or going. The power play wasn't lost on me, but I was surprised to see that she looked as nervous as I felt. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup like it was an anchor, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she'd slept as poorly as I had. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the chair across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." I almost didn't. The admission surprised me with its honesty. But curiosity killed the cat, as they say. Let's hope it doesn't kill us both. She attempted a smile, but it never reached her eyes. "Paige, what I'm about to tell you, it's going to change everything you think you know about your father."
About me.
About why things happened the way they did in high school. My chest tightened with anticipation and dread. Part of me wanted to stand up and walk away, to preserve the carefully constructed narrative I'd built around my past. But the larger part, the part that had never stopped wondering, never stopped hurting, needed to know the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. "Then tell me," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "Tell me everything." Sienna took a deep breath, her knuckles white around the coffee cup. "Your father didn't abandon you, Paige. He was murdered." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs and making the coffee shop spin around me like a carnival ride. Murdered? That was impossible. The police had investigated his disappearance, hadn't they? There had been questions, searches, official reports. No one had ever mentioned murder. I started, then stopped, because looking at her face, I could see she wasn't lying. The pain in her eyes was too real, too raw to be fabricated.
"How do you know that?"
"Because my father killed him." The confession hung between us like smoke, poisoning the air and making it impossible to breathe. My mind reeled, trying to process what she'd just said, trying to make sense of words that seemed to belong in someone else's life, someone else's nightmare. "Your father discovered something he wasn't supposed to know," Sienna continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "About my family's business. About where some of our pharmaceutical money really came from. He tried to blackmail us, and my father doesn't tolerate threats to the family empire." I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching this conversation happen to someone else. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my life. "You're lying," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew she wasn't. I wish I were. Tears had started flowing down her cheeks, cutting through her makeup like acid. "Do you think I wanted to live with this? Do you think I enjoyed knowing what my family had done to yours? Then why?" I couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the question that was tearing me apart. If she'd known, if she'd felt guilty, then why had she tortured me for years? Why had she made my pain even worse instead of trying to help? She understood anyway, because I was 15 years old and terrified, and my father made it very clear that if I ever told anyone what I knew, you and your mother would end up just like him. So I convinced myself that if I made you hate me enough, if I made your life miserable enough, maybe you'd leave town. Maybe you'd take your mother and disappear somewhere safe where my father couldn't reach you. The logic was twisted, desperate, and heartbreaking in its teenage reasoning. I could see the girl she'd been, trapped between her family's monstrous expectations and her own conscience, choosing what she'd thought was the lesser evil. It didn't excuse what she'd done to me, but it explained it in a way that shattered my entire understanding of our shared history. "The note," I whispered. "My father's goodbye note. Did he really write it?" Sienna shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. "My father had it forged. He wanted to make sure no one would look too hard for a man who'd apparently abandoned his family willingly. Everything I'd believed about my life, about my father's character, about my own worth, it was all built on lies. The abandonment issues that had shaped my personality, the therapy sessions spent analyzing why I wasn't worthy of my father's love, the relationships I'd sabotaged because I couldn't trust anyone to stay, all of it based on a cruel fabrication designed to cover up murder. But there was something else, something that didn't fit. "If your father is such a monster," I said slowly, "why are you telling me this now? What's changed?" A shadow crossed her face, and I realized there was more to this story. Of course there was more. There was always more with the Matthews family. They didn't do anything without layers of motivation and calculation. "He's dying," she said finally. "Pancreatic cancer. 6 months at most. And before he goes, he wants to clean up loose ends." The phrase sent ice through my veins. What kind of loose ends? The kind that involve making sure no one can ever connect him to what happened to your father. She leaned forward, her voice urgent now. "Paige, he's planning to kill you. And your mother. He's convinced that somehow, someday, you'll figure out the truth and expose him. He can't risk that kind of scandal, not when he's trying to establish his legacy." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too public for this conversation. I looked around wildly, half expecting to see armed men closing in on our table. "Are you serious? After all these years, he's still—" "He never forgot about you," Sienna interrupted. "Never. He's had people watching you, keeping tabs on your success, your relationships, your routines. He knows about Marcus, about your law practice, about the condo you bought for your mother in Florida. He knows everything." The surveillance explained so much. The feeling I'd had for years that I was being watched, the way certain opportunities had fallen through at the last minute, the strange coincidences that had shaped my adult life. I'd attributed it all to paranoia or bad luck, never imagining that a dying man's obsession with secrecy had been pulling strings behind the scenes of my existence. "Why are you warning me?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. With the Matthews family, help always came with strings attached, and those strings were usually razor wire in disguise. "Because I can't live with any more blood on my hands," she said. "Because I've spent 20 years hating myself for what I did to you, and maybe if I can save you now, it'll balance the scales somehow." It was a nice sentiment, but I'd learned not to trust nice sentiments from people with complicated motivations. "What do you want in return?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw the trap being laid. "I need you to help me destroy him first." "Destroy him how?" "He keeps records. Documentation of everything he's ever done. Everyone he's ever hurt. Insurance policies, he calls them, ways to ensure loyalty and silence. The information about what happened to your father is in there, along with details about dozens of other crimes spanning 40 years. My heart pounded with possibility and terror in equal measure. Evidence of my father's murder would finally give me the truth I'd craved for so long, but it would also paint a target on my back the size of a billboard. "Where are these records?" "In a safe in his study. I have the combination, but I can't get to it alone. He's never without security, and they all report directly to him. But if we work together, if we create the right kind of distraction—" "You want me to help you break into your own father's house and steal evidence of his crimes, including the murder of my father, while he's dying of cancer and surrounded by armed guards." I summarized her proposal with the kind of clinical detachment I used in court when opposing counsel suggested something particularly ridiculous. "I know how it sounds. It sounds like a great way to get killed." I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Even if I believed everything you've told me, even if I trusted your motivations, this is insane." "Paige, wait." She grabbed my wrist as I turned to leave, her grip surprisingly strong. "You don't understand. This isn't optional. He's already put the plan in motion. You have maybe 3 days before his people make their move." The urgency in her voice stopped me cold. 3 days? He's waiting for some business associates to leave town after a board meeting. Clean witnesses, clean timing. You'll have an accident or be the victim of a random crime, something that won't raise suspicions. Your mother will follow within a week or 2. I sank back into my chair, the reality of the situation finally penetrating my shock. This wasn't about choice anymore, it was about survival. And the only person offering me a lifeline was the woman who'd made my teenage years a living hell. Even if we get this evidence, I said slowly, what then? We can't exactly call the police. If your father has that much power, that much influence, he probably owns half the cops in this city. We don't need the police, Sienna said. We need the FBI. And I happen to know that they've been building a case against my father's pharmaceutical operations for months. They just need something concrete to tie him to specific crimes. It was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Help her steal evidence from a dying crime lord, then turn that evidence over to federal agents in exchange for protection and justice. The plan had about 1 million ways it could go wrong, but it also represented the only chance I might ever have to learn the truth about my father's death. Why should I trust you? I asked. How do I know this isn't just another elaborate form of torture? Another way to destroy what's left of my life? She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table to me. Because I brought you something to prove I'm serious. Inside the envelope were photographs, dozens of them, showing me at various points throughout my adult life. Coming out of my apartment building, meeting clients for lunch, on vacation with Marcus in the Bahamas. The surveillance had been comprehensive and thorough, documenting my existence with a kind of detail that suggested professional stalkers rather than casual interest. But it was the last photo that made my blood run cold. It showed my mother walking out of her condo building in Florida, completely unaware that she was being watched and photographed. Someone had drawn a red X over her face. He's not bluffing, Paige, Sienna said quietly. And neither am I. The photos were proof of everything she'd claimed, the surveillance, the threat, the imminent danger to both my mother and myself. But they were also proof of something else, that she'd had access to her father's intelligence files, which meant she was either telling the truth about wanting to help me, or she was setting up the most elaborate trap in the history of psychological warfare. If we do this, I said slowly, if we somehow manage to get this evidence and survive long enough to turn it over to the FBI, what happens to you? You're talking about destroying your own father, your own family. My family destroyed itself a long time ago, she replied. I'm just trying to make sure it doesn't take anyone else down with it. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a physical force. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was insane, that I should run as far and as fast as possible and never look back. But the photos in my lap reminded me that running wasn't an option. There was nowhere far enough to escape the reach of a dying man with unlimited resources and nothing left to lose. When? I asked and saw relief flutter features. Tomorrow night. There's a charity gala at the country club. All of his security detail will be focused on that event. It's our only window. Less than 24 hours to prepare for what might be the most dangerous night of my life. The irony wasn't lost on me that my high school tormentor was now the person I had to trust with everything that mattered. I need to call Marcus, I said. I need to warn him.
No.
Her response was sharp and immediate. You can't tell anyone about this. If my father's suspects were working together, if he thinks you know the truth, he'll accelerate his timeline. We won't get another chance. I can't just disappear for a night without explanation. Marcus will. Marcus will be fine as long as he doesn't know anything. My father's not interested in collateral damage unless it becomes necessary. But if you make it necessary by involving him. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood the threat perfectly. Keep Marcus in the dark and hope for the best, or tell him the truth and guarantee his death. Some choice. There's something else, Sienna said, glancing around the coffee shop to make sure we weren't being overheard. About the night your father died. About what he discovered that got him killed. More revelations. More secrets. I wasn't sure how many more bombshells my psyche could absorb in one conversation, but I nodded for her to continue. Your father was working on the landscaping for our estate, and he found something buried in the garden. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. What kind of something? Medical waste. Hundreds of vials, syringes, contaminated materials from illegal drug trials. My father's pharmaceutical company was testing experimental compounds on homeless people, immigrants, anyone who wouldn't be missed if the trials went wrong. The waste was supposed to be incinerated, but someone was cutting corners to save money. The scope of the crimes was staggering. Not just murder, but human experimentation on the most vulnerable members of society. My father had stumbled onto evidence of atrocities that would have destroyed the Matthews empire and sent dozens of people to prison for life. Your father took photos, Sienna continued. Documentation. He was going to expose everything, bring down the whole operation. But he made the mistake of approaching my father directly, thinking he could negotiate some kind of settlement. Instead of going to the authorities, I said, understanding dawning. He was trying to protect you and your mother. He thought if he handled it quietly, kept it between him and my father, you'd be safe from retaliation. He didn't understand what kind of man he was dealing with. The tragedy of it was overwhelming. My father had died trying to protect us, and his death had caused us decades of pain and trauma. The abandonment issues, the financial struggles, the emotional damage, all of it could have been avoided if he'd made different choices in those final days. But he'd been a groundskeeper with a high school education going up against a pharmaceutical empire with unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. The outcome had probably been inevitable from the moment he dug up that first contaminated vial. The evidence he collected, I said. What happened to it? My father destroyed most of it, but some of it ended up in his insurance files. Photos, soil samples, documentation of the burial site. It's all there waiting. Waiting for us to risk our lives retrieving it. Waiting to finally give my father's death meaning and justice. Waiting to potentially save other innocent people from becoming victims of the Matthews family's casual cruelty. I looked at the surveillance photos again, focusing on the red X drawn over my mother's face. She was 73 years old, living peacefully in a retirement community, completely unaware that her past was about to catch up with her in the most violent way possible. She'd already lost her husband to these people. She didn't deserve to lose her life as well. Okay, I said finally. I'm in, but I have conditions. Name them. First, we do this my way. I'm a lawyer. I know how to plan for contingencies and minimize risks. Second, if we get caught, if something goes wrong, you don't try to save me. You get out and make sure the evidence reaches the FBI no matter what happens to either of us. She nodded grimly. Agreed. Anything else? Yes. I met her eyes across the table, seeing something there I'd never noticed in high school. Genuine remorse, deep and painful and lasting. When this is over, when the dust settles and the trials are finished and justice is served, I want you to disappear from my life. I can work with you to survive this, but I can't forgive what you did to me. Some things are beyond redemption, even with explanations. The words hit her like physical blows, and I saw her flinch with each syllable. But she nodded anyway, accepting the terms of our alliance with the same grim determination that had carried her through 20 years of guilt and regret. Fair enough, she said quietly. One last job, and then I'll be out of your life forever. As I walked back to my car, I felt the weight of the next 24 hours pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. Everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for, every relationship I'd cultivated, it all hung in the balance now, dependent on a plan hatched in desperation by two women with every reason not to trust each other. But for the first time in decades, I also felt something else. Hope. Hope that I might finally learn the truth about my father's death. Hope that his murder might finally be avenged. Hope that the Matthews family's reign of terror might finally come to an end. Whether that hope would survive the next day remained to be seen. But as I drove home through the streets of my childhood, I carried with me the knowledge that tomorrow night would change everything, one way or another. The question wasn't whether I was ready for what was coming. The question was whether I could survive it long enough to see justice done. And as the sun set behind the hills of Riverside Heights, painting the sky the color of blood and promise. I realized that ready or not, tomorrow was coming. Some battles choose you, whether you want them or not. This was mine. Part 2. Ghosts in the Garden. The security camera blinked red in the darkness as I crouched behind the marble fountain, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain the guards would hear it from 50 yards away, but it was the sound of my own father's voice, carried on the wind from the garden behind me, that made my blood turn to ice. 24 hours had passed since my meeting with Sienna, and now here I was, dressed in black like some amateur cat burglar, waiting for her signal from inside the Matthews estate. The plan was simple in theory. She would create a distraction during her father's oxygen therapy session, drawing the guards away from the study long enough for me to slip inside and photograph the contents of his safe. But nothing about this night was going according to plan. First, there had been twice as many guards as Sienna had predicted, their patrol routes overlapping in ways that made infiltration nearly impossible. Then the security system had been upgraded since her last reconnaissance, with motion sensors and pressure plates that hadn't been there a week ago. And now, impossibly, I was hearing my father's voice drifting across the meticulously landscaped grounds of the estate where he'd supposedly died 20 years ago. Paige, sweetheart, you need to be careful. The voice was faint, distorted by wind and distance, but unmistakably his. The same gentle tenor that had sung me lullabies, helped me with homework, promised me that everything would be okay even when Mom was crying herself to sleep again. My father's voice, speaking my name in a place where he should have been nothing but buried bones and fading memories. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, my rational mind screaming that this was impossible, that grief and adrenaline were making me hallucinate. Dead men don't speak. Dead men don't warn their daughters about danger. Dead men don't. The greenhouse, the voice whispered, closer now. Look in the greenhouse, baby girl. That's where the real truth is hidden. The greenhouse. I could see it from my position behind the fountain, a Victorian-era structure of glass and wrought iron that seemed to glow with its own inner light. It hadn't been part of our plan. Sienna had mentioned it only in passing, describing it as her mother's old orchid sanctuary, abandoned since her death 5 years ago. But if my father was if he was trying to tell me something, a sharp whistle from the direction of the main house cut through my spiraling thoughts. Sienna's signal. The guards were moving, drawn away by whatever crisis she'd manufactured inside. This was my window, my chance to reach the study and retrieve the evidence that would finally give my father's death meaning. Except now I was torn between the mission we'd planned and the impossible voice calling me toward the greenhouse. Logic demanded I stick to the plan, but my heart was already moving toward the sound of my father's voice, toward answers I'd never dared to hope for. The greenhouse door was unlocked, which should have been my first warning that something was wrong. But grief makes fools of us all, and I stepped inside without hesitation, surrounded immediately by the humid warmth and overwhelming scent of exotic blooms. The interior was a jungle of overgrown plants and neglected beauty, orchids and tropical flowers running wild in the absence of their caretaker. Moonlight filtered through the glass ceiling, casting everything in silver and shadow, and for a moment I felt like I'd stepped into a fairy tale or a nightmare. "You came," said a voice behind me, and I spun around to find myself face to face with a ghost. My father stood in the doorway, older and thinner than I remembered, his hair gone completely gray and his face marked by lines that spoke of years of hiding and pain. But it was him, unmistakably, impossibly him. The same kind eyes, the same gentle smile, the same way of tilting his head when he was worried about me.
Dad.
The word came out as barely a whisper, disbelief and hope and terror all tangled together in my throat. You're alive? I'm so sorry, sweetheart." Tears were streaming down his weathered cheeks as he took a step toward me. "I'm so sorry for everything you've been through, everything you've believed about me. I never wanted to hurt you, but I had to disappear. I had to make them think I was dead, or they would have killed you and your mother." The world tilted sideways, reality reshaping itself around this impossible revelation. My father was alive. My father was alive, and he'd been hiding for 20 years, letting me and Mom believe he'd abandoned us, letting us live with the pain of his absence while he, what? Watched from the shadows? Let us suffer while he stayed safe. Where have you been? The question came out harsher than I'd intended, anger mixing with relief in toxic proportions. Do you have any idea what your disappearance did to us? To Mom? She drank herself to death grieving for you. I know. His voice broke on the words. I know, and I've lived with that guilt every single day. But Charles Matthews made it very clear that if I ever surfaced, if I ever tried to contact you, you'd both be dead within hours. So I stayed hidden, and I watched, and I tried to protect you from the shadows. Protect us? I laughed bitterly. You call letting Sienna torture me for years protecting us? You call letting Mom die alone and broken protecting us? Sienna was trying to get you to leave town, he said urgently. She was trying to drive you away from here, away from her father's reach. It was crude and cruel, but it was the only way she knew how to help. She was just a kid herself, terrified of what her father would do if she openly defied him. More revelations, more layers of deception and hidden motivation. The story I'd constructed about my past was crumbling faster than I could rebuild it, leaving me dizzy with the effort of processing so many fundamental changes to my understanding of reality. If you've been alive all this time, I said slowly, if you've been watching, then you know about tonight. You know what Sienna and I are planning. His expression darkened. It's a trap, Paige. Everything she's told you, everything she's shown you, it's all been orchestrated by Charles. He's been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment to draw you in. That's impossible. She showed me the surveillance photos, the evidence. Evidence he wanted you to see. Photos he had taken specifically to convince you that you were in danger. He stepped closer, his hands reaching for mine. Think about it, sweetheart. Why would Sienna suddenly develop a conscience after 20 years? Why would she risk everything to help you now, when she could have helped you any time in the past 2 decades? The questions hit me like physical blows, each one highlighting holes in Sienna's story that I hadn't wanted to see. Why now? Why, after all this time, was she suddenly willing to betray her own father to help me? The timing was too convenient, too perfectly aligned with whatever Charles Matthews was planning. But the cancer, I said weakly. She said he was dying. He is dying, but not from cancer. My father's voice dropped to a whisper. He's dying from the same experimental compounds that killed dozens of his test subjects. Poetic justice, in a way, but it's also made him more dangerous than ever. A dying man with nothing to lose and unlimited resources is the most dangerous enemy you can imagine. Then why bring me here? Why risk exposing yourself? Because I couldn't let you walk into his trap without knowing the truth. And because. He hesitated, then pulled something from his jacket pocket. Because I have something that belongs to you. It was a photograph, creased and faded from years of handling. It showed the 3 of us, Mom, Dad, and me, at my 13th birthday party, just a few months before his disappearance. We were laughing at something off camera, caught in a moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness that seemed to belong to another lifetime. I've carried this with me every day for 20 years, he said softly. It's been my reminder of what I was fighting for, what I was trying to protect. But I think it's time I gave it back to you. The photograph blurred as tears filled my eyes. This was what I'd been missing all these years, not just my father's presence, but the proof that he'd never stopped loving us, never stopped thinking about us, never stopped carrying us with him even in exile. There's more, he continued, his voice growing urgent again. About what I discovered here, about why Charles really wants you dead. It's not just about covering up old crimes, it's about preventing new ones. What do you mean? The experimental compounds, the human testing, it never stopped. Charles just got better at hiding it, better at selecting victims who wouldn't be missed. But he's planning something bigger now, something that would kill thousands of people. And he thinks you might be the key to stopping him. The scope of the conspiracy was expanding beyond anything I'd imagined. Not just murder and cover-ups, but ongoing crimes against humanity with body counts that would make headlines around the world. And somehow, impossibly, I was supposed to be the key to stopping it all. Why me? I asked. I'm just a lawyer. I don't know anything about pharmaceuticals or human experimentation. Because you're his weakness, my father said. Your success, your visibility, your refusal to be broken by what happened to you, it all represents everything he fears. You're living proof that he can't control everything, can't destroy everyone who threatens him. And that terrifies him. Before I could respond, the greenhouse door burst open and Sienna stumbled inside, her elegant evening gown torn and bloodied, her face marked by what looked like fresh bruises. She saw my father and stopped dead, her eyes widening with shock. You're supposed to be dead, she whispered. So are you if your father finds out you've been helping me, he replied grimly. What happened? You look like you've been through a war. Because I have. She pressed a hand to her ribs, wincing. The whole thing was a setup, just like you said. Dad was waiting for me in the study, along with half his security team. He knows about our plan, knows about this meeting. He's been playing us all along. How did you get away? I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. I didn't get away. He let me go. Fresh tears carved tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. He wanted me to find you, to bring you back to him. He said if I don't deliver you within the hour, he'll start killing everyone you've ever cared about, starting with Marcus. The trap was complete, perfectly orchestrated to exploit every weakness and emotional vulnerability. Charles Matthews had anticipated every move, prepared for every contingency, and now he had us exactly where he wanted us. There's something else, Sienna continued, her voice breaking. About your mother, Paige. She's not in Florida. She's here, in the estate. Dad's had her for 3 days. The world went silent except for the sound of my own heart breaking. My mother, the woman who'd raised me alone, who'd struggled with addiction and depression and the crushing weight of abandonment, was in the hands of the man who'd orchestrated all of our suffering. Is she? I couldn't finish the question.
She's alive.
Hurt but alive. He's been using her as insurance, making sure you'd cooperate when the time came. But Paige, if we don't go back now, if we don't do exactly what he wants, he'll kill her. I completed the thought, my voice hollow with despair. Just like he killed all those test subjects. Just like he's been killing anyone who gets in his way for decades. No, my father said firmly. We're not going back there. We're not walking into his trap. There has to be another way. What other way? I demanded. He has Mom. He has Marcus under surveillance. He has unlimited resources and a private army. What possible chance do we have against that? We have the truth, he said, pulling another item from his jacket. And we have this. It was a flash drive, small and unremarkable, but I could see from his expression that it contained something significant. Something that might finally tip the scales in our favor. What's on it? Sienna asked. Everything, my father replied. 20 years of documentation, photographs, recordings, financial records. Every crime Charles Matthews has ever committed, every life he's destroyed, every corner he's cut in the name of profit. It's all here. Where did you get this? I never stopped investigating. Even in hiding, even in exile, I kept gathering evidence. I knew that someday, somehow, there would be a reckoning. I just never imagined it would involve my daughter walking into the lion's den. The flash drive represented everything we'd been trying to achieve. Evidence of Charles Matthews' crimes, proof of his guilt, documentation that could bring down his entire empire. But it also represented a choice. Use it to save ourselves while leaving my mother to die, or try to save her and risk losing everything. There's a third option, I said suddenly, an idea forming in my mind. We use the drive as leverage. We make him an offer he can't refuse. What kind of offer? Sienna asked. A trade. The evidence for our lives. All of us, me, Mom, Marcus, even you and Dad. Complete amnesty in exchange for our silence. My father shook his head. He'll never agree to that. He's not the type to negotiate when he holds all the cards. Then we change the game, I said, my lawyer's mind finally engaging with the problem. We take away his cards. We make him need us more than we need him.
How?
I looked at both of them, seeing the desperate hope in their eyes, and realized that for the first time in 20 years, I held the power in this relationship. Not Charles Matthews, not his money or his connections or his private army.
Me.
By showing him what happens when he pushes too far, I said. By proving that some people can't be intimidated, can't be controlled, can't be broken. By being exactly what he fears most, someone who refuses to be afraid. The plan that formed in my mind was dangerous, probably suicidal, and definitely not something a rational person would attempt. But rationality had gone out the window the moment I discovered my father was alive and my mother was in the hands of a dying madman. Sometimes the only way out is through. Sometimes the only way to win is to risk everything. And sometimes the only way to face a monster is to become something he's never encountered before, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. As we prepared to leave the greenhouse and walk into the most dangerous night of our lives, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood, my father's hand in mine, steady and strong and unafraid. Whatever happened next, whatever price we paid for our defiance, we would face it together. The night was far from over, and the real battle was just beginning. But for the first time in 20 years, I felt like I had a chance, not just to survive, but to win. To finally bring Charles Matthews to justice, to rescue my mother, to reclaim the life that had been stolen from our family decades ago. The question was no longer whether I was brave enough to face him. The question was whether he was ready to face me. Part 3. The Price of Truth. The mahogany doors of Charles Matthews' study opened with a whisper of expensive hinges, and I walked into the lion's den wearing my father's courage like armor. But nothing could have prepared me for the sight of my mother bound to a chair in the corner, her silver hair matted with blood, and her eyes reflecting a terror I'd never seen before. "Hello, Paige." Charles Matthews looked exactly as I remembered from the newspaper clippings I'd obsessively studied over the years, silver-haired, distinguished, the kind of man who commanded respect through presence alone. But now I could see the sickness eating him from the inside, the way his expensive suit hung loose on his diminished frame, the yellow tinge to his skin that spoke of organ failure and approaching death. Death, apparently, had made him more dangerous, not less. "Let her go," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the fact that my heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. "This is between you and me." "Oh, but it's so much more than that now, isn't it?" He gestured to the wall of monitors behind his desk, each one showing a different surveillance feed. I could see my father and Sienna waiting in the greenhouse, Marcus asleep in his apartment across town, even footage of what looked like FBI agents positioned around the state perimeter. "You've made this quite the family reunion." The monitors revealed the scope of his surveillance network and the scope of our problem. If he had agents watching everyone we cared about, if he could track our every move in real time, then our chances of getting out of this alive had just dropped to nearly zero. "You're wondering about the federal agents," he continued, settling into his leather chair with the casual confidence of a man who held all the cards. "I called them myself, actually. Told them I had evidence of industrial espionage, foreign agents attempting to steal pharmaceutical secrets. They were quite eager to help protect American interests." "You turn the FBI into your private security force," I said, understanding dawning with sick clarity. "They think they're here to stop criminals, but they're really here to stop us from exposing you. Power, my dear, is the ability to make other people believe your version of reality." He pressed a button on his desk, and one of the monitors zoomed in on my mother's face. She was conscious now, looking directly at the camera with an expression that mixed defiance and desperation in equal measure. "Your mother has been quite vocal about her opinions of me. Perhaps you'd like to hear what she has to say." The audio crackled to life, filling the room with my mother's voice, weak but unmistakably furious. "You tell my daughter that I didn't raise her to negotiate with monsters. You tell her that some things are worth dying for, and that the truth is one of them." Tears burned my eyes, but I forced them back. This was exactly what he wanted, to see me broken, to see me choose between justice and the people I loved. But my mother's words carried a message beyond their surface meaning. She was telling me to be strong, to be brave, to finish what my father had started 20 years ago regardless of the cost. "She's quite the fighter, your mother," Charles said with mock admiration. "Reminds me of another woman I knew once. Your father's wife was equally stubborn when she refused to accept his death. It took years of careful manipulation to drive her to drink herself into submission." "You destroyed her on purpose," I whispered, the full scope of his cruelty finally becoming clear. "It wasn't enough to kill my father. You had to torture my mother too. You had to make sure she suffered for years before she died. I had to make sure she never looked too closely at the circumstances of his disappearance. Grief-stricken widows ask inconvenient questions. Broken alcoholics do not." His smile was cold and calculating. "Though I must admit, I underestimated her daughter. You were supposed to be collateral damage, not a problem that would resurface decades later. But I did resurface. And now I'm here, and I have something you want." I pulled the flash drive from my pocket, holding it up so he could see it clearly. 20 years of evidence. Every crime, every cover-up, every life you've destroyed. All of it documented and ready to be released to every news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country. For the first time since I'd entered the room, I saw uncertainty flicker across his features. The flash drive represented everything he'd spent decades hiding, every secret that could destroy not just him but his entire family legacy. "You're bluffing," he said, but there was less confidence in his voice now. "Your father was a groundskeeper, not an investigative reporter. He wouldn't have had access to the kind of information you're claiming." "He had something better than access," I replied. "He had time. 20 years of watching, waiting, documenting every move you made. Did you really think he spent 2 decades in hiding doing nothing? He's been building a case against you piece by piece, and this drive contains enough evidence to put you away for the rest of your very short life." The bluff was only partially a lie. I knew the drive contained damaging information, but I didn't know exactly how much or how damning it would be. But Charles didn't know that, and the uncertainty was clearly eating at him. "What do you want?" he asked finally. Everyone walks away. My mother, my father, Sienna, Marcus, me. All of us disappear, and you never see or hear from us again. In exchange, the drive stays buried forever. And if I refuse? Then the drive gets released in exactly. I checked my watch with theatrical precision. 47 minutes. I've set up a dead man switch. If I don't input a code every hour, the files automatically upload to a dozen different servers and get sent to journalists around the world. It was a complete fabrication, but it sounded plausible enough to give him pause. The key to a successful bluff was making the consequences of calling it too terrible to risk. "You're assuming I care about my reputation after I'm dead," he said, though I could see him calculating odds and probabilities behind his eyes. "A dying man has very little to lose. But a dying man's daughter has everything to lose." I glanced meaningfully at one of the monitors, which showed Sienna still waiting in the greenhouse. "How do you think the Matthews pharmaceutical empire will fare when the world learns that it was built on human experimentation and murder? How do you think Sienna's children will handle growing up with that legacy?" The mention of his grandchildren hit home in a way that threats to his own reputation couldn't. I could see the calculation changing, the risk-reward analysis shifting as he considered the long-term consequences to his family line. "Besides," I continued, pressing my advantage, "you're forgetting something important. I'm not the scared little girl you tried to destroy 20 years ago. I'm a successful attorney with connections throughout the legal system, and I've spent the last decade building relationships with journalists, judges, and politicians. Even if you kill me tonight, even if you eliminate everyone in this room, the truth will still come out. I've made sure of that." This part, at least, was completely true. My legal career had given me access to people who would ask questions if I disappeared, who would investigate if something happened to me. Charles might be able to make 1 or 2 people vanish without consequence, but he couldn't eliminate an entire network of professional relationships without drawing exactly the kind of attention he was trying to avoid. "You've thought this through," he admitted grudgingly. "I underestimated you. Again. You underestimated my father too. And look how that turned out for you." The words hung in the air between us. carrying the weight of 20 years of consequences and missed opportunities. If he'd handled my father's discovery differently, if he'd tried negotiation instead of murder, none of us would be in this room right now. "There's just one problem with your plan," Charles said, his confidence returning as he pressed another button on his desk. "You're assuming I need to let you leave here alive." The monitors shifted to show new footage. Marcus being dragged from his apartment by men in tactical gear, my father and Sienna surrounded in the greenhouse by armed guards, FBI agents moving into position around the estate's perimeter. In the space of seconds, every piece of leverage I thought I had evaporated. "The beautiful thing about federal agents," he continued, "is that they're authorized to use lethal force when dealing with suspected terrorists. And you, my dear, are about to become a very dangerous terrorist who threatened American pharmaceutical interests." The trap was closing with mechanical precision, every avenue of escape being systematically eliminated. But there was something else, something I could see in his eyes that told me he was still missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. "You're forgetting something," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady as panic clawed at my chest. "The drive. Even if you kill all of us, even if you spin whatever story you want to the FBI, you still don't know where the real evidence is hidden." "The real evidence? Did you really think I'd walk into your house carrying the only copy of information this valuable? The drive in my hand is encrypted, useless without the password that only I know. And the password is stored in a location that only I can access." Another bluff, but this one landed with devastating effect. I could see him running calculations, trying to determine if I was telling the truth, weighing the risks of killing me without securing the evidence first. "Where?" he demanded. "Somewhere you'll never find it. Somewhere that requires me to be alive and free to access." I took a step closer to his desk, the flash drive still visible in my palm. "But I'll make you another offer. A better offer." "I'm listening." "You let everyone go except me. I stay here, I give you the password, and I help you destroy every piece of evidence that could damage your family. In exchange, my mother lives out her remaining years in peace, my father disappears forever, and Sienna gets to raise her children without the shadow of your crimes hanging over them." It was the ultimate sacrifice play, trading my life for everyone else's freedom. But as I spoke the words, I realized they felt right in a way that surprised me. For 20 years, I'd been running from the trauma of my past, trying to build a life that would prove I was more than the sum of my wounds. Maybe the time had come to stop running and start standing. "Why would you do that?" Charles asked, genuine curiosity replacing calculation in his voice. "Why sacrifice yourself for people who've caused you so much pain?" "Because that's what family does," I replied, thinking of my father's 20 years in exile, of my mother's defiant words on the monitor, even of Sienna's twisted attempts to protect me through cruelty. "We protect each other, even when it costs us everything." For a moment, something that might have been respect flickered across his features. But it was quickly replaced by the cold pragmatism that had defined his entire life. "An admirable sentiment," he said, "but ultimately naive. You see, I've learned something about family over the years. It's the greatest weakness a person can have. The moment you care about someone more than yourself, you become controllable, predictable, weak." "Is that why you never loved Sienna?" I asked, the words coming from somewhere deep and angry inside me. "Is that why you turned your own daughter into a weapon against innocent children? Because love made you weak?" The question hit him like a physical blow, and for the first time since I'd entered the room, his mask of control slipped completely. I saw the man beneath the monster, exhausted, dying, perhaps even capable of regret. "I loved Sienna more than life itself," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Everything I did, every choice I made, it was all to protect her, to build something that would keep her safe and secure long after I was gone." "You turned her into a monster," I said, pressing the advantage that his vulnerability had given me. "You made her hurt innocent people, carry guilt that's been eating her alive for 20 years. You call that love?" "I call it survival," he snapped, his composure returning like armor sliding back into place. "The world is full of predators, Paige. The strong devour the weak, and the only way to protect the people you care about is to make sure you're the strongest predator in the room." And look where that philosophy got you. You're dying alone, surrounded by enemies, watching your empire crumble around you. Your daughter despises what you've made her become. Your wife is dead, and your legacy will be nothing but scandal and shame. Was it worth it? The words seemed to echo in the silence that followed, carrying the weight of a life's worth of choices and their consequences. Charles stared at me for a long moment, and I wondered if I'd finally found the crack in his armor that would bring the whole structure tumbling down. Then he smiled, and I knew I'd miscalculated badly. "You're assuming I care about my legacy," he said, reaching into his desk drawer. "You're assuming I want to be remembered fondly, that I'm concerned about how history will judge me. But you're wrong about something fundamental, Paige. I'm not trying to build a monument to myself. I'm trying to burn everything down." The gun in his hand was small and elegant, the kind of weapon a man of his stature would choose. But it was pointed directly at my mother, and I could see from his expression that he had no intention of negotiating further. "The experimental compounds that are killing me," he continued conversationally, "they were never an accident. I've been testing them on myself for months, documenting the effects, perfecting the formula. And tomorrow, they'll be released into the water supply of 12 major cities across the country." The scope of his final plan hit me like a sledgehammer. Not just murder or cover-ups, but mass genocide on a scale that would make headlines around the world. Hundreds of thousands of innocent people would die, and there would be no way to trace it back to him, because he'd be dead before the first symptoms appeared. "Why?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "Because I can," he replied simply. "Because I have the power to reshape the world according to my vision, and my vision doesn't include the kind of weak, sentimental fools who think love conquers all. The compounds will target specific genetic markers, the empathetic, the cooperative, the people who put others before themselves. What's left will be stronger, more pragmatic, more like me." "You're talking about genocide," I said, my voice barely audible. "The systematic murder of millions of people because they don't match your psychological profile." "I'm talking about evolution," he corrected. "Accelerated natural selection. The removal of weakness from the human gene pool." "And Sienna? Your grandchildren? Are they weak enough to be eliminated too?" "Sienna will survive. She's proven she has the strength to do what's necessary, even when it hurts. As for her children," he shrugged with chilling indifference, "they'll either be strong enough to survive or they won't. Either outcome serves my purposes." The casual way he discussed the potential murder of his own grandchildren revealed the true depth of his madness. This wasn't just about covering up old crimes or protecting his reputation. This was about a dying man's final attempt to impose his twisted worldview on humanity itself. "The FBI agents outside," I said, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "They're not here to protect you. They're here to be your first test subjects." "Very good. The compounds work best when introduced through close contact, and federal agents have access to water supplies in major metropolitan areas. They'll carry my gift back to their homes, their offices, their families. The infection will spread exponentially from there." "You'll be murdering children," I said desperately. "Innocent babies who've never hurt anyone, who've never even had the chance to show whether they're strong or weak by your standards." "Children are remarkably resilient," he replied. "The ones who survive will be better for the experience." The complete absence of empathy in his voice made my skin crawl. This wasn't just a criminal or even a terrorist. This was something fundamentally inhuman, something that had lost every trace of connection to the species it was trying to reshape. But his monologue had also given me something crucial. Time. Time to think, to plan, to find the flaw in his seemingly perfect scheme. And as I looked around the room, taking in the monitors and the gun and my mother's terrified face, I began to see the outline of a desperate last gambit. "There's something you haven't considered," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable despite the fact that my heart was racing like a hummingbird's wings. "Something that could ruin your entire plan." "Oh, and what's that?"
Me.
I held up the flash drive again, but this time I was smiling. "You see, while you were explaining your grand scheme to murder half the planet, I was recording every word. His eyes flicked to the device in my hand, and I saw understanding dawn with horrifying clarity. The flash drive wasn't just storage, it had a built-in microphone, and it had been recording our entire conversation. Even if you kill everyone in this room, I continued, even if you release your plague and remake the world in your image, this recording will survive. The FBI agents outside will find it, along with your detailed confession of planned genocide. Your daughter will be arrested as an accessory. Your grandchildren will grow up knowing exactly what kind of monster their grandfather was, and your legacy will be that of history's greatest mass murderer. Give me the drive, he said, the gun swinging toward me now.
No.
The word came out stronger than I'd expected, carrying 20 years of accumulated defiance and pain. I'm done being afraid of you. I'm done letting you control my life, my family, my future. Whatever happens next, the truth survives. Then you'll die with it. Maybe. But you'll die knowing that you failed. That despite all your power, all your planning, all your cruelty, you couldn't break the one thing that mattered most, a daughter's love for her family. The standoff stretched between us like a taut wire, two wills locked in mortal combat. In the monitors, I could see chaos erupting throughout the estate. FBI agents moving toward the house, my father and Sienna somehow breaking free from their guards, Marcus fighting his captors with surprising effectiveness. But it was my mother who broke the stalemate. Paige, she called out from her chair, her voice weak but determined. Do you remember what I used to tell you when you were little? About what makes someone truly strong. I did remember. Through all the years of her drinking, through all the pain and dysfunction that had defined our relationship, there had been moments of clarity when she'd shared the wisdom that had kept her going through the darkest times. Strength isn't about never falling down. I recited, the words coming back to me across the decades. It's about getting back up every time you fall. That's right, baby. And you've been getting back up your whole life. Don't stop now. The encouragement gave me the courage I needed for what came next. In one fluid motion, I dropped to the floor and rolled toward Charles's desk, using the confusion to get inside his line of fire. The gun discharged with a sound like thunder, but the bullet went wide, embedding itself in the mahogany paneling behind where I'd been standing. Before he could fire again, I was on him. 20 years of pent-up rage and terror giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. We crashed to the floor together, the gun skittering away across the expensive Persian rug, and for a moment we were just two people fighting for their lives in the most primitive way possible. But he was dying and weak, and I was young and desperate and fighting for everyone I'd ever loved. The outcome was never really in doubt. When the FBI agents burst through the door 90 seconds later, they found Charles Matthews unconscious on the floor, my mother tied to a chair but alive, and me sitting calmly at his desk with a flash drive in one hand and a smoking gun in the other. Agent Torres, FBI, the lead agent announced, though his weapon remained trained on me. Step away from the weapon and put your hands where I can see them. The weapon belongs to Charles Matthews, I said, carefully placing the gun on the desk and raising my hands. And I think you're going to want to hear what's on this recording before you decide who the real criminal is here. As it turned out, a confession of planned genocide carries significant weight with federal law enforcement, even when it comes from a respected pharmaceutical executive. Within hours, the water treatment facilities in 12 major cities were under federal protection. Charles Matthews was in federal custody fighting for his life after what his doctors diplomatically called a stress-induced cardiac event, and the entire Matthews pharmaceutical empire was under investigation for crimes spanning 4 decades. The truth, as it turned out, really did have power. More power than money, more power than influence, more power than fear. It just took 20 years and nearly getting everyone I loved killed to prove it. 3 months later, I sat in a coffee shop. Not the one where this had all started, but a small place near my mother's new apartment in witness protection, reading the final newspaper coverage of what reporters were calling the Matthews Massacre. Charles had died in federal custody before his trial could begin, taking his secrets with him but leaving behind enough evidence to convict dozens of his associates and shut down operations that had been murdering innocent people for decades. Sienna had turned state's evidence in exchange for immunity, providing testimony that had helped prosecutors understand the full scope of her father's crimes. She'd moved to Oregon with her children, started fresh with a new name and a clean slate. We'd exchanged letters once or twice, but both of us understood that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. My father had emerged from 20 years of hiding to testify at the congressional hearings that followed, his documentation proving invaluable in understanding how such massive crimes had gone undetected for so long. He was living quietly now, trying to rebuild a relationship with my mother and coming to terms with the life he'd lost to Charles Matthews' paranoia. And me? I was still a lawyer, still fighting for justice, but now I understood something about strength that I'd never grasped before. It wasn't about never being afraid, never being hurt, never being broken. It was about finding the courage to stand up anyway, to protect the people you loved even when the costs seemed unbearable. Some battles choose you, whether you want them or not. But sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you get to choose how they end. As I folded the newspaper and prepared to visit my mother, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 20 years. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of resolution. The certainty that whatever came next, I would face it with my family by my side and the truth as my weapon. Charles Matthews had been wrong about one thing above all others. Love didn't make you weak. It made you invincible. And that, in the end, had made all the difference.